Hi everyone, this is William Lee back to talk more about the Romanov Dynasty of Russia. So this will be the second installment in my series of that name, and I'd hoped to do one before now. I think it's been exactly a week, so I'd hoped to do one midweek, but that just didn't turn out to be possible. So hopefully I will be able to do that in the future. I don't know about this coming week, but we'll see. I have a relatively short presentation today, and the topic today is titles, so royal titles in Russia, and successions. Succession law. Briefly, we'll touch upon that just briefly. So I wasn't thinking about the wind chimes. I'm actually in my own backyard. Usually the problem is dogs and power tools. But in this particular backyard, I guess I'm very close to the wind chimes. But at least that's a pleasant noise. It's not like dogs barking or power tools. There are chickens in the yard. Four suburban chickens here. But they tend not to be very noisy creatures, so that probably won't be an issue. So, as some of you know, I have two other YouTube series. One is specifically on Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich of Russia and going through his diaries. So he was born in 1891, and I'm doing one diary entry a day from 1906 and one diary entry a day from 1921. So him as Dmitry as a teenager in Imperial Russia in 1906, and then as a man in his 20s, almost 30 years old, in exile in France in 1921. So have a look at those if that interests you at all. And I have another series that's not so much related to the Romanovs, although Dmitry figures largely in it, and that is called Life on the Mountain, and it's about life in during the TB sanatorium era in Davos, Switzerland, at a sanatorium that's now a hotel. And so it was Sanatorium Schatzalp, and now it's Hotel Schatzalp. And since that was the place where Dmitry spent the end of his life, he arrived there in September 1939, and he died there in March 1942. He figures a lot in that series because he kept a diary while he was there. And it is, so far as I know, the only diary that survives that was kept by a patient at Schatzalp. I'm hoping there are others, but so that series has more of a focus on the famous Thomas Mann novel, The Magic Mountain, but also on Grand Duke Dmitry's experience as a patient there. So, as I said, today's topic is, to begin with, is titles. So we have a few titles. We have the title Tsar, the title Grand Duke, the title Veliki Knyaz, and then Tsarevich, Cesarevich, and Naslednik. I think that's also a mixture of Russian and English, and also a little French. So because this series focuses largely on the Romanov Grand Dukes, let's start with that particular title. So Grand Duke is the English and also the French way of rendering Veliki Knyaz, which is the Russian title that the Grand Dukes used, and it means literally great prince in Russia. So there weren't any dukedoms in Russia. There were none. So when there were people who had the title Duke, like the Duke of Leuchtenberg, for instance, that person had a foreign title, even though he was a member of the Russian imperial family on his mother's side. So there are a couple of these that have ducal titles, but those are not Russian titles. So the Grand Dukes themselves called themselves Grand Dukes when they were abroad. They didn't try to teach people to call them Veliki Knyaz. That's quite a mouthful for a non-Russian speaker. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. So in both French and English, they were happy to be referred to as Grand Dukes. And in fact, in the memoirs of Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich, the post-revolutionary memoirs, the title in English is Once a Grand Duke, Always a Grand Duke. And also with Dmitri's sister, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna the Younger, when she wrote her memoirs in exile, the title they were given in English was The Education of a Princess, and a Princess in Exile. So really the title Prince or Princess is more legitimate, because that's what the word knyaz and knyaginya means in Russian. But for whatever reason, it was Grand Duke when they were abroad, and they accepted that. So let's talk a bit about archdukes. So archdukes and Grand Dukes are not interchangeable. So archdukes were Habsburgs. Archdukes were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so if you refer to a Russian Grand Duke or a German Grand Duke as an archduke, then that is incorrect, and things will quickly get muddled up. So yeah, so in German, I should add, the title Duke in German is Herzog. And the way Grand Dukes were and are referred to in German is not Erzherzog, but Großfürst. So all of the Grand Dukes, while they were in Germany, would have been Großfürst. Großfürst Dmitri, Großfürst Nikolai, what have you. So that, like the Russian Veliki Knyaz, literally means grand or great prince. So that's something to remember. So grand in the sense of big, and or great. Actually, I should say not big, but great, because they certainly weren't all very tall. There were some small ones and some very tall ones. Yeah, so maybe the French title Grand Duke came before the English Grand Duke, but when the two that I will use, Veliki Knyaz, or Veliki Knyaz 3, Großfürst and Grand Duke, but since this is an English language program, I will mostly stick with Grand Duke. All right, so let's talk now about Tsars. So when did Russia have its first Tsar? Well, it was long before the Romanovs came on the scene. Well, not long, I shouldn't say, several decades. But Grand Dukes existed in Russia before Tsars did. So you had Veliki Knyazya, Grand Dukes in Russia, fairly early on, at a time when you did not have Tsars. So those Grand Dukes were the leaders, the hereditary leaders of principalities. So there were the Grand Dukes of Kiev, and they existed before Moscow became the center of Mother Russia. And then they were followed by a dynasty called the Rurik dynasty. So they were Scandinavians. They were Vikings, basically. And they had the title Prince, and then Great Prince or Grand Duke, and all of these little princedoms gradually came under the sway of one big one, which was it was called Vladimir and Moscow. So you had the Grand Duke of Vladimir, meaning the city, not the name, the Grand Duke of Vladimir and Moscow, or the Great Prince of Vladimir and Moscow, and everything had moved from Kiev to Moscow. And so you had the Grand Dukes of Moscow, and those were the Ruriks, those were the Ivans, the Ivans and Vasilis, and one of them, finally, Ivan IV, proclaimed himself the Tsar, and that occurred in 1547. So he had been the Grand Duke of Moscow, of Vladimir and Moscow, since 1533. So he'd already been on the throne, so to speak, for over a decade before he was secure enough to proclaim himself the Tsar of all the Russias. So he was, so let's talk about the title Tsar. So if you listen to it closely, then you can hear that it sort of, if you take the word Caesar and you sort of compact it, then you come up with something like Tsar. So it's closely related then to the German word Kaiser and to the Roman Caesar, which is where it came from. Ultimately, it came from the Roman Caesars. So a Tsar in Russian, it's spelled, in Russian there's a letter TS. It's a single letter that makes the Ts sound. So in Russian it's pronounced Tsar and Tsaritsa. And the German spelling with the Z, which in German is pronounced Tsa, but with a Z instead of a TS. And so that's where you get that's where you start to get the other spellings, like the CZAR, which technically should still be pronounced Tsar. But that is a trivial thing. Okay, so Ivan IV becomes the first Tsar of Russia in 1547. And what is special about Ivan IV? Well, we know him mainly by another name, which is Ivan the Terrible. And so he was the last ruler of the Rurik dynasty. He had at least 2 sons. None of his sons survived him. One of his sons, I believe, Ivan killed himself. I think there's a famous painting of him in confrontation with this son. And another son was 9 years old when he was killed. His name was Dmitri. He was out playing, and it was supposedly an accident. He sort of fell on a knife and cut his own throat, but clearly that was not the case. Clearly it was a murder. So Ivan, when he died, had no more sons. And so what to do? Well, we'll get into that later. That was a whole big mess that went by the name of Smuta, or Time of Troubles. And Ivan had a wife who was a Romanov. And so that's something that we're going to get to later. I don't want to go on about that now because we're still defining definitions. So a Tsar, and the ending, the masculine ending in Russian, vich, V-I-C-H, or in French, V-I-T-C-H, means son of. So it would make sense then for the sons of a Tsar to be called Tsarevich, or the son of a Tsar, right? But that wasn't initially the case. So initially, sorry, I'm looking down at my notes here. Initially, the title Tsarevich was used by Tatars. The Mongols had managed to take over Russia for, I think, something like, I don't know. I'm not even going to say, because I'll make a fool of myself. I don't have it right in my memory. But it was a long time. It was several generations. And they used the title Tsarevich, and the way they used it, it was the son of a Khan, or a ruler within the Mongol and Tatar invaders and their government. So again, I'm not going to get into that, but Tsarevich, until the 18th century, so relatively late, was not what you would call the son of a Tsar. And after that, it became the term that you use for the son of a Tsar, but it's still rather complicated, because what is a Tsarevich? Is it any son of a Tsar? Or is it only the eldest son who is going to succeed his father? Well, actually, we didn't even have a clear male primogeniture line of succession as yet. It was the custom, but it wasn't the law. There was no legal basis for that. It had simply been the custom. So, the eldest son may indeed be groomed as his father to be his successor, but he wouldn't exclusively have the use of the title Tsarevich, when that title began to be used by the son of a Tsar. So that custom gradually changed so that you weren't talking about younger sons as Tsarevich. So, for instance, Nicholas II in the 20th century and the early 19th century, he had a younger brother, and his younger brother could have been referred to as Tsarevich, but was not referred to as Tsarevich. He was referred to as Veliki Knyaz, or Grand Duke. So that custom began where the eldest son was called Tsarevich, and the younger sons were called Grand Duke. So every son of a Tsar technically could legitimately hold both of those titles, and the girls, for instance, let's say the 4 daughters of Nicholas and Alexandra, the last Tsar, they could be called Tsarevna, which was the female version, the daughter of a Tsar, and it wasn't linked to succession at that particular time in Russian history. At the end of the imperial era, only males could succeed to the throne. But again, they are typically called Grand Duchess and not Tsarevna. All right, so I hope this isn't too confusing. Let me look at my notes. So we have a title that goes beyond Tsarevich, and in most English language works on Russian history, we use the word Tsarevich to mean the Tsar's eldest son, just the way I'm using Grand Duke to mean Veliki Knyazya, because it's simply more convenient. But there was a title beyond Tsarevich, and that title was Tsarevich. So you have Tsar, which is much closer to Caesar. And that was a title that was usually, but not always, exclusive to the heir to the throne. So I say not always. It was only exclusive to the heir to the throne when it was used with another word, which is naslednik. So if you see a reference to a naslednik Tsarevich, then that is the heir to the throne. There are no others. But there were a couple of instances during the 3 centuries that the Romanov dynasty ruled Russia, where there were younger sons of Tsars who were not heirs to the throne, but who were given by their senior relative, whether it was an emperor or an empress or what have you, they were allowed to have the title Tsarevich to show their importance and the favor they were in with the ruler. All right, so we've covered that, and we need to talk more, and we will talk more about the line of succession, because there were no formal laws in Russia pertaining to the imperial family until relatively late, which the very end of the 18th century, 1797, the Emperor Paul I saw a very strong need, for reasons that we'll get into, for there to be an actual code of laws pertaining to the imperial family. So that's the 1797 fundamental law on the imperial family. And until then, you did not have this legally imposed male primogeniture, where the eldest son was automatically the heir to the throne, and that created some difficulties. The fact that simply wasn't in existence. But the main concern wasn't having too many people who were claimants to the throne. The main concern was to have any heir to the throne at all. That was the problem up until the end of the 18th century, if you can imagine. So what I have in my notes is that that between the time of Muscovite Rus and the Emperor Paul, who reigned from 1796 to 1891, there was not a single junior male member of the Romanov dynasty who made it to adulthood, and could become the heir to the throne. So after, actually, Yeah, Peter the Great's oldest son did, but there was not a single one who made it beyond, long enough to really be in the picture. All right, what do I have? Neither Muscovy nor Imperial Russia witnessed the maturity of a single junior Romanov until Constantine Pavlovich came of age during the reign of Emperor Paul. Okay, the reason I say that is because Peter the Great's son, Alexei, was not a junior member of the family. He was the heir to the throne. His father raised him as heir to the throne. Well, that ended badly, but there weren't any younger sons. There weren't any spare Grand Dukes who could have stepped in and been heir to the throne, literally from the time from the late 17th century until Paul had his 4 sons in the late 18th century. Okay, so this is, as I said, an extremely important issue that we're going to talk about at some length, but not today. Okay, and in fact, the Romanov succession from eldest son to eldest son was not actually grounded in functional reality until Alexander II's enthronement in 1855. So I hope that's not too pedantic for all of you. I hope you will come back for other topics that aren't so focused on sorting out terminology. But I also think that this was a necessary thing to discuss before we get started. And yeah, if I left anything out, I guess I'll have to cover it next time. So please do come back, and thank you for watching, and thank you to all of you who watched the first episode as well. I was really pleased with the results of that. All right, take care. Bye.